The baby isn't real, but the money you sent was. I'm Carmen Aguilar. I'm 35 years old, and I own a dental practice in San Antonio, Texas that nets about $245,000 a year. If you have ever poured your heart, your soul, and your bank account into your family, only to have them treat you like a line of credit, then you need to hear this. Subscribe, because this is the story of how I stopped being an asset and started collecting my debts. The words hung in the air of my parents' living room, sharp and cold enough to cut through the cloying scent of pine needles and roasting turkey. My brother's wife, Sarah, had a smirk on her face, the kind of lazy, self-satisfied expression I'd seen 1,000 times. It was the look of someone who believed they had just won a game I didn't even know we were playing. The Christmas lights blinked on the tree, casting shifting, festive colors across her face, turning her cruelty into something grotesquely cheerful. My mother, Isabella, gasped theatrically, a hand flying to her chest. My father, Marco, just stared down into his glass of eggnog, as if it held the secrets to the universe. And my brother, Leo, the golden child, the center of their universe and the black hole in mine, just stood there, looking helpless. It was his default setting. For a full 10 seconds, nobody spoke. The only sound was a Bing Crosby song crooning from a small speaker in the corner. A ghost of holiday cheer in a room that had just become a tomb. I had been holding a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, a particularly good vintage I'd brought myself. My hand didn't shake. I didn't drop the glass. I didn't scream or cry or launch myself across the coffee table laden with untouched cookies and festive napkins. I simply and very gently set the wine glass down on the polished oak. The click of glass on wood was quiet, but in that suffocating silence, it sounded like a gavel. I looked directly at Sarah, then at Leo. I let my gaze settle on him, my useless, charming, pathetic brother. I understand, I said. And I did. In that single, crystalline moment of betrayal, 3 years of lies and manipulation and one-sided sacrifice snapped into perfect, horrifying focus. The lie was the disease. My understanding was the cure. But they had no idea that the cure was not for me, but for them. And it would be brutal. Because I hadn't come to Christmas dinners seeking the truth. I had come already possessing it, holding it like a loaded weapon, waiting for them to walk right into my line of fire. I had hired a forensic accountant 3 weeks before the party, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation already had a copy of his report. The inequality in our family wasn't a crack. It was the foundation. It was built into the very structure of our childhood. Leo was born with a halo, and I was born with a ledger. When he was 8, he wanted a new Schwinn bicycle for his birthday, a brilliant, chrome and red marvel. He got it. I got his old one, a dented hand-me-down with a wobbly wheel, my parents explaining that it was practically new, and I didn't need a fancy one. When Leo failed algebra in 10th grade, my father sighed and said, "Math is hard for creative minds." When I got a B+ in calculus, my mother asked, "What happened to the A-, mija? You have to work harder." Leo was the story they told at parties. I was the silent, dependable infrastructure that made those stories possible. He was the charming, aimless dreamer who was finding himself, a process that proved to be astonishingly expensive and geographically varied. I was the pragmatist who started working at a local diner at 15, not for pocket money, but to start a college fund my parents had made clear they wouldn't be contributing to. "We have to save for Leo's future," my mother would say, as if my own future was a foregone and less interesting conclusion. The financial bleed started early. It began as a trickle, small loans I was too young and too desperate for familial approval to refuse. $50 here for gas, $100 there for a concert ticket. In college, it escalated. While I was juggling a full-course load in pre-dental studies and working 30 hours a week as a phlebotomist, Leo decided to attend a private art school. He lasted 1 semester before dropping out, leaving my parents with $12,000 in non-refundable tuition fees. They didn't blame him. They held a family meeting where my mother, tears in her eyes, explained that Leo's artistic spirit was being crushed by the rigid curriculum. The unspoken part of the meeting was the expectation. I gave them $3,000 from my savings, nearly everything I had, to help out. It was framed not as a loan, but as my duty. After I graduated from dental school, with over $200,000 in student loans that I alone was responsible for, the trickle became a torrent. I was a resident, working 80-hour weeks, barely sleeping, and eating instant noodles more often than I cared to admit. Yet to my family, my degree was not an achievement. It was a resource. It was an ATM. Leo's ventures were a revolving door of failure, each one more expensive than the last. There was the organic dog food startup, which required a $15,000 investment from me for initial inventory. It folded in 6 months when he discovered he didn't actually enjoy waking up at 5 a.m. to bake. Then came the artisanal coffee roasting business. That was a $5,000 emergency loan for a rare shipment of Ethiopian beans that I later discovered was a weekend trip to Las Vegas with Sarah. I co-signed an apartment lease for them, a beautiful loft downtown that was far beyond their means. They missed 3 months of rent, and the $3,200 bill landed squarely on me, a black mark on the credit I was meticulously building. Each time the script was the same: a desperate, tearful call from Leo, a follow-up call from my mother, Isabella, her voice thick with guilt and obligation. "He's your brother, Carmen. He's just trying to find his way. Family helps family. What will people think if you let him fail?" My father, Marco, would just nod in the background, his silence a form of passive, corrosive agreement. Keep the peace, his posture always said. Just keep the peace. But their peace was purchased with my money, my time, and my eroding sense of self-worth. Then, 3 years ago, the nature of the grift changed. It became more sophisticated, more insidious. It became about a baby. Leo called me on a Tuesday night. I was at my clinic, reviewing patient charts long after my staff had gone home. His voice, for the first time in years, sounded genuinely happy. Sarah was pregnant. They were having a girl. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. A niece, a tiny person to love, to spoil, to connect with in a way I had never connected with her father. This, I thought, would change everything. A baby would make Leo grow up. It would give him a sense of responsibility. It would finally make us a real family. I was a fool. They named her Luna, a beautiful name. For a few months, the updates were normal, filled with sonogram pictures they'd pulled from the internet and excited chatter about nursery colors. I sent them a top-of-the-line crib and a car seat, nearly $2,000 worth of gifts they immediately returned for cash. I didn't know that at the time. The first sign of trouble came with a panicked call from Leo, 6 months into the pregnancy. Luna was born prematurely, he said, his voice a convincing performance of a terrified father-to-be. She was in the neonatal intensive care unit. There were complications, a heart condition, something rare and terrifying with a long, complicated name he could barely pronounce. That was when the real scam began. The first wire transfer was for $5,000. It was October 12th. I remember the date because I had just made the final payment on my practice establishment loan. It was supposed to be a day of celebration for me. Instead, I spent the evening on the phone with a sobbing Leo, who described in gut-wrenching detail the beeping machines and tiny, fragile body of his daughter. The money was for a specialist consultation, an out-of-network doctor who was the best in the country. I sent it without a second thought. A month later, they needed $10,000 for an experimental procedure that insurance wouldn't cover. It was a long shot, Leo explained, but it was Luna's only hope. I sold off a portion of my stock portfolio to cover it. The portfolio was meant for a down payment on a house. Luna's health, I reasoned, was more important than my real estate ambitions. After that, it became a monthly drain. $1,500 wired on the first of every month for ongoing medication and specialized neonatal care. It was an amount just large enough to hurt, but not large enough to force me to liquidate a major asset. It was perfectly calculated. For 3 years, I paid it. I postponed renovating my clinic. I put off hiring a new hygienist. I drove my 10-year-old car and told myself it was character building. I poured every spare dollar and every ounce of emotional energy into a sick child who did not exist. My requests to visit her were always met with a carefully constructed wall of excuses. In the beginning, they were believable. "She's in a sterile quarantine environment, Carmen. No visitors at all. It's too risky. Later, they became more desperate. We can't FaceTime. The light from the screen could interfere with her monitors. Or, she's having a bad day, we don't want you to see her like this. They sent photos, blurry and poorly lit, of a baby in an incubator surrounded by a web of tubes and wires. I now know those were images stolen from the blogs of real grieving parents. The thought of that particular violation still makes my stomach turn. The lie was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, and for 3 years, I was its willing patron. I wanted to believe. I needed to believe that my sacrifice meant something, that I was helping to save the life of my niece. The doubt began as a whisper. It was a subtle unease, a feeling of wrongness I couldn't quite articulate. The stories from Leo and Sarah started to have small inconsistencies. The name of a medication would change from 1 week to the next. A doctor's recommendation they'd mentioned would be forgotten the following week. It was nothing concrete, just the fraying edges of a complex lie. I confided in my best friend, Jessica. Jess isn't just my friend. She's a partner at a corporate law firm in Austin, with a mind like a steel trap and zero tolerance for nonsense. We were having dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant. I was explaining, for the 10th time, why I couldn't join her on a trip to Italy. All my extra cash is going to Luna's medical fund, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Jessica put down her fork and looked at me, her expression unreadable. Carmen, she said, her voice low and even. Have you ever actually seen this child? I bristled. Of course not. She's in the NICU. She's too fragile. For 3 years, she pressed. No FaceTime, no video calls. Not one clear picture. You're a medical professional. Does any of this clinical narrative make sense to you? The timelines, the procedures they describe? I started to defend them. The familiar excuses tumbling out of my mouth. But hearing them said aloud in front of Jessica's logical, unblinking gaze, they sounded thin. They sounded pathetic. The seed of doubt she planted began to germinate in the dark, fertile ground of my exhaustion and resentment. The true turning point, the moment the whisper of doubt became a roar, arrived 2 weeks before that fateful Christmas. Leo called, his voice a frantic mess. Luna had taken a turn for the worse. She needed an immediate life-saving surgery. He was short $20,000. The hospital required the payment upfront. He sent me a photo to underscore the urgency. It was another picture of a baby in an incubator, this one clearer than the others. This was taken this morning, his text read. Please, Carmen, she's all we have. I stared at the photo on my phone. As a dentist, my entire career is built on minute details. I noticed the specific model of the intravenous pump next to the incubator. It was an older model, one my local hospital had phased out at least 5 years ago. The resolution of the image was just slightly off, with a faint pixelation around the edges that suggested it was a screenshot, not an original photograph. My blood ran cold. My fingers moved automatically. I downloaded the image and uploaded it to a reverse image search engine. The results appeared in less than a second. The photograph was from a 2017 medical journal article titled Advances in Neonatal Cardiac Care. It was a stock image. It wasn't my niece. It wasn't Luna. It was a prop in their long, elaborate, and cruel fiction. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger, not at first. What I felt was a profound and terrifying emptiness, the feeling of standing on ground you thought was solid, only to realize you've been in free fall the entire time. The $78,250 I had sent them wasn't just money. It was my postponed dreams, my sacrificed security, my love and hope and worry, all of it given freely to a ghost. That night, I called Jessica. I didn't tell her what I'd found. I just said, I need the name of the best forensic accountant you know. Someone discreet and very, very thorough. She didn't ask why. She just said, I know a guy. His name is Arthur Davies. He's a shark. I'll make the call. Arthur Davies was a small, unassuming man in his late 60s, with pale blue eyes that seemed to see everything. His office was Spartan, organized with a precision that bordered on obsessive. He didn't offer condolences or judgment. He just listened. I laid out the story, the dates, the amounts. I showed him the stock photo. Wire fraud is a federal offense, Dr. Aguilar, he said calmly, peering at my bank statements through a pair of silver-rimmed glasses. The paper trail is often brutally clear, We will subpoena your brother's bank records and trace every dollar you sent. It will take some time, but we will find out where your money went. The preliminary report from Mr. Davies arrived in a sealed envelope via courier 1 week before Christmas. I opened it in my office, the door locked, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound. The report was 12 pages long, a cold clinical autopsy of my family's betrayal. None of the $78,250 had gone to any hospital, medical clinic, or pharmaceutical company. The money had been systematically siphoned from Leo's checking account within days of my wires arriving. The transactions were broken down with chilling specificity. $35,000 had been transferred to a series of offshore sports betting websites. Another $21,000 had been withdrawn in cash increments from ATMs near a casino in Louisiana. The final series of payments, totaling over $22,000, had been made to a marina in Corpus Christi. Attached to the report was a copy of a bill of sale. It was for a used 24-foot Sea Ray motorboat. The sale was dated a year and a half prior, and at the bottom of the document, under the line for the vessel's name, were 2 words typed in neat, black ink: the Lucky Luna. They had named the boat after the fictional, dying child they had invented to steal from me. The audacity of it, the sheer sociopathic cruelty, was breathtaking. This was the backfire device, the seed of their own destruction they had so arrogantly planted. It wasn't just fraud, it was a mockery. They were laughing at me on the open water, celebrating their deception with the proceeds of my sacrifice. There was no emotional outburst. The rage I felt was cold, a block of ice forming in my chest. It was a quiet, calculating fury. My grief for the niece I never had was replaced by a steely, absolute resolve. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had weaponized my love. They had exploited my compassion. They had built their leisure on my labor. And now I was going to build their ruin on their own recklessness. I didn't confront them, not yet. The trap had to be perfect. The exposure had to be absolute. I called Leo back about the $20,000 he'd requested for the surgery. My voice was calm, sympathetic. Of course, Leo. Anything for Luna. I'll bring the check with me on Christmas Eve. We can celebrate the good news about her surgery together, as a family. He sounded relieved, ecstatic even. He had no idea he was a dead man walking. The week leading up to Christmas was the busiest of my life, but none of my work was happening at the clinic. My first call was to Jessica, who put me in touch with an assistant United States attorney she knew from a pro bono case. We met in a sterile conference room downtown. I walked him through the evidence, my bank records, the text from my brother, the stock photo, and the centerpiece, Mr. Davies's immaculate report. The prosecutor, a man named Henderson, didn't say much. He just listened, his eyes scanning each document. When he got to the bill of sale for the Lucky Luna, he looked up at me. "Dr. Aguilar," he said slowly, "this is one of the cleanest cases of wire fraud I've ever seen. The naming of the boat is what we call consciousness of guilt. It's brazen. It's what will convince a jury, should it come to that." He agreed to take the case. A formal complaint would be drafted and filed, but he would hold off on serving any warrants until after the holiday, as a professional courtesy to me. My next stop was my own lawyer's office. I had her redraft my will, my living will, and my medical power of attorney. Leo's name was expunged from every document. He was no longer my heir, no longer the person who would make decisions for me if I were incapacitated. I named Jessica as my executor and my primary beneficiary. It took less than an hour to erase my brother from my future. Finally, I went home and sat at my desk. I took out 2 sheets of my best stationery. I wrote 2 letters, one to my mother and one to my father. The letters were identical. They were short, direct, and devoid of emotion. They explained that my financial, emotional, and physical support for them and their son was ending, effective immediately. I detailed the fraud in the 2 brief sentences. I told them this was not a negotiation. I told them not to contact me again. I signed them, sealed them in envelopes, and placed them in my handbag. For the rest of the week, I played my part. I answered my mother's calls and listened to her fret about the Christmas menu. I spoke to Leo and listened to his fabricated updates on Luna's pre-surgery preparations. Each lie they told was another nail they hammered into their own coffins. I felt nothing. I was a surgeon, preparing to excise a tumor. The process would be painful, but the survival of the host depended on it. I was the host. Christmas Eve arrived, cold and clear. I drove to my parents' house, the same house I'd grown up in, feeling like a stranger. The folder containing copies of all my evidence was on the passenger seat next to me. The 2 letters to my parents were tucked inside. I walked up the pathway, the familiar Christmas wreath on the door, and felt a pang of something that might have been sadness, but it was fleeting. It was the ghost of a feeling, a memory of a love that no longer existed. Dinner was a surreal performance. We ate turkey and stuffing, passed the gravy, and made small talk. Sarah bragged about a recent spa weekend. Leo talked about wanting to upgrade his car. My mother beamed at him, so proud of her son, who she believed was weathering his daughter's illness with such grace. My father was quiet as usual. I ate slowly, methodically, a spectator at my own life. After the meal, we moved to the living room to exchange gifts. This was my moment. As my mother passed around cups of coffee, I cleared my throat. Before we opened presents, I began, my voice even. I was hoping you could tell me how Luna is doing. I'm so excited to finally meet her soon, once this surgery is behind her. It was the cue for their final act. Leo and Sarah exchanged a look of practiced sorrow. It's been tough, Leo said, shaking his head. But the surgeon is optimistic. He thinks this procedure will make all the difference. My mother, Isabella, chimed in, right on schedule, her voice trembling. My poor grandbaby. It's just so unfair. But she's a fighter, just like her daddy. She reached out and squeezed Leo's arm. I'd love to see a recent picture, I said, my voice soft. Just to see her little face. Panic flickered in Sarah's eyes. Oh, we didn't bring our phones in here, she lied, her phone sitting face up on the end table beside her. The doctors say it's better if we don't take too many photos, Leo added quickly. The flash, the electronics, it's all very sensitive. I let the silence hang for a moment. I just looked at them. I didn't blink. It was Sarah who broke first. She had been drinking wine steadily all evening. Her arrogance, lubricated by alcohol, got the better of her. She let out a short, sharp laugh. Oh, for God's sake, Leo, just tell her, she said, waving a dismissive hand. She turned to me, a cruel, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. The baby isn't real, but the money you sent was. There it was, the confession, the final damning piece of the puzzle, offered up so freely, so contemptuously. The room fell into that profound silence. Bing Crosby was still singing. I set my wine glass down. I understand, I said. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. I opened it on the coffee table with a calm, deliberate motion. The sound of the paper sliding across the wood was unnervingly loud. I understand that on October 12th, 3 years ago, I wired you $5,000 for a specialist consultation that never existed. I slid the first bank statement, with the transfer highlighted in yellow, onto the center of the table. Leo's face began to pale. I understand, I continued, my voice a flat monotone, that the 17 subsequent transfers, totaling $78,250, were not used for any medical bills. I laid down the summary page from Arthur Davies's report. Sarah's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. I understand that this photo you sent me last week, of my supposedly dying niece, I said, my voice dropping an octave, is a stock image from a 2017 medical journal. I placed the color printout of the webpage next to the report. My mother gasped, this time for real. My father finally looked up from his drink, his eyes wide with disbelief. And I understand, I finished, my voice like ice, that the money was actually used to pay off gambling debts and to purchase this. I slid the final document into the center of the tableau of their deceit. It was the bill of sale. Leo stared at it. His eyes darted from the document to my face and back again. He saw the name of the vessel, typed clearly for all to see. The Lucky Luna. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. That's a coincidence, he finally stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. That was when my mother found her voice. Her shock morphed into a towering rage, but it wasn't directed at her son. It was directed at me. "How could you?" she shrieked, her face contorted. "How dare you come into my home on Christmas Eve and embarrass your brother like this? You are a cruel, heartless woman, Carmen." I didn't even look at her. My focus was on Leo and Sarah, who were frozen, staring at the undeniable proof of their crime. I stood up from the couch. The time for discussion was over. "A federal complaint for wire fraud was filed with the U.S. Attorney's Office this morning," I said, my words clear and precise. "They have been in possession of this evidence for a week. I expect you'll be hearing from them shortly after the holiday." Sarah made a small, choking sound. The color had drained completely from Leo's face. He looked like he was going to be sick. I turned to my parents, who were now both on their feet. I reached into my handbag and pulled out the 2 envelopes. I placed them on the mantelpiece, next to the framed photos of their perfect son. "As for you," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument, "my financial and emotional support ends tonight. Those letters will explain everything. Do not contact me again." I walked to the front door without another word. The spell of silence was broken. Behind me, the room erupted into chaos. My mother was screaming obscenities at me. Leo was yelling something about betrayal, something about how I was selfish. Sarah was openly sobbing, a raw, panicked sound. I heard a glass shatter. I didn't turn around. I didn't look back. I closed the door gently behind me, shutting out the noise of my former family for the last time. In my car, the silence was a blessing. My phone began to light up, a frantic series of calls and texts. My mother, Leo, Sarah, my father. I didn't read them. I pulled over to the side of the quiet suburban street, the festive lights of other happier homes twinkling around me. I systematically blocked each of their numbers. Then I put the car in drive and drove home. 6 months later, the world had shifted. The consequences I had set in motion had unfolded with the slow, grinding indifference of the legal system. Leo and Sarah were arrested 2 weeks after that Christmas. The evidence against them was so overwhelming, so meticulously documented, that their lawyer advised them to take a plea deal. They never went to trial. Leo was sentenced to 36 months in a low-security federal prison in Bastrop. His charm, for the first time in his life, had failed him. Sarah, who the court determined was less culpable but still a willing participant, received 24 months of probation, 500 hours of community service, and was ordered to co-sign the restitution order. The FBI's asset forfeiture unit moved quickly. The Lucky Luna was seized from the marina in Corpus Christi and sold at a government auction. Their car, which I had helped them buy, was repossessed. Their apartment was emptied by a sheriff executing a writ of possession after they were evicted. Through the restitution process, I eventually recovered $52,112. It was a fraction of what they had taken, if you counted the interest and the emotional toll, but it was something. It was a cold, hard number that represented a victory. My parents were collateral damage in their son's self-destruction. In a desperate attempt to pay for Leo's legal fees, they had tried to take out a second mortgage on their home. It was only then that they discovered Leo had already done so, forging their signatures on a home equity line of credit application a year prior, a debt he had, of course, defaulted on. The subsequent financial implosion was swift and brutal. They were forced to declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The house I grew up in, the stage for so many years of quiet resentment and overt favoritism, was sold to cover their debts. My mother sent one last letter to my clinic. It was a long, rambling screed filled with venom and accusations. She blamed me for everything. For Leo's incarceration, for their financial ruin, for destroying the family. I didn't read past the first sentence. I wrote "Return to sender" on the envelope and put it back in the mail. I never heard from my father at all. His silence in the end was his final, defining act of cowardice. And me? I am thriving. The peace in my life is a tangible thing. A quiet space where the phone doesn't ring with another manufactured crisis. I used the recovered restitution money, along with my own savings, to finally expand my practice. I bought a small medical building downtown, hired 2 new hygienists, and an associate dentist. My business is more successful than I ever imagined it could be. I took that trip to Italy with Jessica. I walked through the Colosseum and drank wine in Tuscany and felt the weight of my old life fall away. I live in a new house now, a place with no memories attached to it. It's quiet. Sometimes I sit on my back porch in the evenings, looking out at the Texas sky, and I think about them. I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel hatred. I feel a profound and detached sense of pity. They built a life on a foundation of lies, and it collapsed, as all such structures eventually do. The family you are born into is an accident of biology. The family you build and protect is a choice. My brother and his wife made their choice, over and over again, with every dollar they took and every lie they told. And on that Christmas Eve, I finally made mine. Kinship earns nothing without respect.